Hi everyone, this one's going to be on 9-slicing. So 9-slicing is a concept used a lot for UI elements, mainly panels and things like that. So the idea being that you slice up a sprite into 9 segments where the corners never change size, even when you rescale things. The sides only stretch in the one direction, and the center either stretches or repeats, depending on how it's set up. And in that way, you minimize the amount of distortion and warping when you rescale a sort of a sprite or a 2D image. It's used a lot for like background panels in UIs. Now we're going to create an asset for this first, so I'm just going to start in Photoshop. And I'm not going to take up most of the time doing this, but we will talk about a couple of concepts. So I'm just creating a 512 by 512 image. So remember, we've got to maintain our power of 2. And I've downloaded a texture to help me with that. Photoshop is taking a little while. I'm just going to pause. All right, Photoshop's back. So for this, I'm going to make a little bit of a box, right? Because whatever I'm using for this is going to need some sort of border and something in the center. For the center, I'm actually just going to use a tileable texture that I grabbed from the internet. Or at least I'm going to start with this. I'm actually going to just quickly, because it's a bit too much for me, make a layer underneath with mid-gray, and then bring this opacity down. That's more like it. And I might set it to a blend mode. I like difference actually kind of looks like what I want. Bring the opacity down just a bit. All right. And we're going to add a border to this. So I'm going to make another layer on top. And for the border, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a brush a little bit wider than that. Black. And I'm just going to shift click on these edges. It's a little bit fatter there. That's acceptable. Well, that's not. Oop, didn't mean to do that. It's not completely square, but that's fine. It'll do for what I need. And on this, I'm just going to do a quick layer style. So I'm going to double click on my layer, do a bevel emboss, maybe an outer bevel. I'm going to do an emboss, and I'm going to do a upward direction with a hard chisel, make it a little bit more aggressive. I'm also going to do a stroke, and the stroke, I'm going to do it on the inside. I'm just going to make it goldy color. Character. Yeah. And in fact, I might even recolor that black to. Gonna give me my color swatches. There we go. Or of a goldy color as well. There we go. All right. So that's going to be our sprite. I'm just going to quickly save that out as a. Still doesn't want to save out as a PNG for some reason. So I'm going to save a copy as PNG. It's going to be a UI panel. My desktop. All right, close Photoshop. I think it's just using up too much memory with everything open. All right, so we're going to start in Unreal. Actually, we'll start in Unity because Unity actually does this easier than Unreal. So I'm going to drag this over into Unity. And it is a sprite, and it is multiple. Sprite editor, apply, and we're going to go to automatic. Whoop. And we're just gonna drag in. Actually, gonna go. No, that's right. We want these green lines. So grab these green points. We drag them in. Just to the inside of that shadow. Didn't want to bring that one. Just the green line. And now this is actually cut up into multiple sprites. If I hit apply, open this up, it shows up as one sprite, but it is sliced with a border. And now when I put a UI image in, I'm just going to stick it in the middle of the screen with that sprite. It recognizes that it's sliced. It's one of the settings. And now when I scale this, it's stretching the inside, but it's not stretching the border. It scales them on their own axis. So this lengthens and shortens, but it doesn't get fatter when I do this. Right? And the center can be done in a couple of different ways. We can even ask it to take the center out, right, and just have a border. Now, whereas simple will stretch. That's how it would operate automatically if we didn't do sliced. Not going to help us. And tiled will do the same thing, but you notice my inside part doesn't stretch. This is actually what we want for this because we've got a tileable texture in our panel. So this way it will repeat. If we didn't use a tileable texture, we'd end up with these nasty seams where it repeats, and we'd probably be better off going with the other one. But tiled is going to work nicer for us here. All right. So we can use this for the backdrop, for a whole bunch of other elements or anything like that, reuse it for a bunch of things, and it's always going to look right. It'll start to wig out if it gets smaller than the width of the borders, but otherwise it looks fine. All right, so let's go across and do that in Unreal. So over in Unreal, again, I'm just going to drag my UI panel in, and I'm going to go to extract sprites. It's only the one sprite. I'll extract it. All right, now this is the only way I've found to do this. Somebody else might have some better indications, but all my Googling, it didn't help. So I'm going to create a widget blueprint. I have to have a widget to draw my UI. I'm just going to call it a panel test. It's fine. And I'm going to put an image in this. Now, I think the reason that it's not the biggest emphasis is in Unreal is because they actually have a border component. What you would normally do in Unreal is actually just make the fill part and have a border on said image. Right? And your border would handle all of that itself. But if we want to make the whole panel, what we can do is plug our sprite in to image. Right? And you notice that it's stretching by default. But there is a box setting which takes margins. And these margins are a percentage, 0 to 1 percentage. All right. So it's the percentage of the image that the border takes up. So let's do a 0.1. Right. Scale this around. It's doing its best. All right. Maybe it was 0.23. It's definitely not any more than that. All right. Not ideal. It's still doing a little bit of the stretching. I think it might have been less. Let's go back to 0.2. I think we'll find it's a very particular amount of it that we took up. But it's hard because we need the percentage, right? 0.25 is not too bad. What we should do is just make a really stretched one and then play with this until we get it. Is it less? It's not less. Oops. Oop, that's not right. Definitely not that much. So it's wigging out. Anyway, yeah, it doesn't handle this super well, in my experience. We can tell it to also act as a border. It handles that much, much better, but it's doing the whole image, right? So the whole thing is becoming our border. Again, we can go in and set some margins on a border. It's actually less. That's why we were having trouble. 0.03. That's about right. So we have a border. Let's try changing that to box with that setting. It's actually reacting right now. It's just not drawing very well. But the border itself is actually doing what it's supposed to do now. But what we really should have been doing with this, it's going to stretch, yeah, is actually making a border and an image separately. So let's actually bring our border back in and put that on here. And let's give our border the same image. But we'll set it to border and 0.03. I think that was what it was. Right. And our image on the inside, let's just make it a straight up image. And we'll set it to... It's already set to fully scale. Yeah, if to do this properly, we would actually probably have wanted to take the guts of that separate as a separate file to do it right, and done the border more or less the way we did the border, but with the inside image handled separately or handled as a separate piece. All right. So Unreal kind of treats borders and images as separate things, or at least it handles them better when you do it that way. You can still do a proper 9 slice, but it doesn't handle them quite as well. It expects you to break things up a little bit more. All right. So that's the concept of 9 slicing with some implementation in both engines and discussions of the differences in how they handled.